My name is Richard Ray Miles Jr., and I am currently the founder, president, and CEO of Miles of Freedom. So Miles of Freedom is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our main mission is to provide holistic services for individuals, families, and communities impacted by incarceration. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I like to say that my upbringing was very spiritually guided, very structured family. My dad started ministering, when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. And from that point, we were voluntold to go to church. And so it was no discussion about church growing up. And my pillars, I would say, was family, education, and spirituality. Going to small middle schools and elementary, Skyline was the largest school that I'd ever walked in. I mean, it's like 3,000 students, and walking into this school, it was just so much potential. Once I kind of dabbled into the different clusters or vocations that Skyline had to offer, it was just something about plastics technology. And maybe it was because they called it plastics engineering, versus childcare or aviation. It was just something about that word engineering, I think, that piqued my curiosity. I'm going through my checklist and I say, I'm finishing high school. I have a job. I want to move in with LA, which was the manager of McDonald's. And I'm still going to go to college. I'm still going to pursue TSTC, but I want to start flying on my own, so to speak. I oftentimes say that May 15, 1994 was the day that Richard Ray Miles Jr. died. Because everything that I had aspired to be, to do, ceased the moment those handcuffs was placed on me. A shooting had happened at this Texaco where a club had let out. Two gentlemen was in a white 300ZX, and as they were talking to a young lady, somebody came from behind the Texaco and they leaned into the car. They fatally shot the driver, and the passenger survived. Everybody gave descriptions of 6'2", 6'4", real dark complected, had on a white shirt and shorts. I was arrested, 5'7", 5'8". I don't consider myself as really being dark complected, brown skin, at that. But yet and still, I had on a white shirt and pants. I turned down Bluffview when I noticed a police car that was just kind of idly sitting. And it seemed like the minute I was walking beside the police car, I heard a helicopter. I look up, and as it seemed, I looked up, this light just shines on me. Boom. I didn't take out running. I just kept walking because I'm thinking that there's been a span. The light never gets off of me. All of a sudden, I heard these police cars, these commands, get on the ground, get on the ground. They put handcuffs on me. They give me my Miranda rights, and they put me in the back of this police car. To me, I say, man, my friend, Bo, just dropped me off. He's right around the corner. He's at his girlfriend's house. I mean, you can go talk to him. I don't know what's going on. He says, well, when you get downtown, you'll meet a detective. You'll be able to talk to the detective. And everything you're telling us, if it's true, he's going to check it out. And you'll be going home. From May 15, 1994, I never walked out of custody until October 12, 2009. When they took me to the Texaco, it was 10 witnesses. The only person that picked me out was the only witness that was behind the Texaco. Marcus Thurman being the witness that was behind the Texaco. I do believe Mr. Thurman at the point in time was a reserve deputy law enforcement in the state of Oklahoma. When the shooting happened, a white Cadillac comes to pick up the actual person that did the shooting. The witness runs to gets in his car. He follows this white Cadillac. The witness then drives to the Texaco, tells the police officers what he has seen. Now the APB goes out, and this is when Richard Ray Miles Jr. comes walking up the street. The gunshot residue test was done at this Texaco in an uncontrolled environment. And at that Texaco was also where the one witness out of the 10 saw me in custody. The results did come back positive in the palm of my right hand, but negative anywhere else. Keeping in mind that I was arrested maybe 30 or 40 minutes after a shooting where multiple bullets had been shot. So for them to just retrieve something in the palm of my right hand and run with that as a positive test really shocked me a couple of months later. After they escorted me from the Texaco, now I finally get a chance to go to CAPERS, Crimes Against Persons. And so I gave this detective 5 phone numbers along with where I had been that day. And he came back in. He said, well, Richard, your alibi is checked out. He said, but we have one person that said that you killed one person and shot another person, and you're going to be arraigned for murder and attempted murder. To be accused of something that's not even in your makeup is very disheartening. To be accused by an entity in which you were taught growing up that law officers are the authority and you should respect them and they're going to protect you. And now the particular entity that I was brought up on to believe that they were protecting me has now violated me. I would meet my court-appointed attorney and he would tell me that because he didn't have enough resources, financial resources, to adequately investigate my case, he wanted me to see if my parents, them, could come up with some money. It was about $2,000, I remember. We didn't have that type of money. And over the 17 months in the county jail, waiting on trial, I probably talked with Ed Gray 4 or 5 times. Not a lot. You know, anytime you lose a trial and you're innocent, that's a failure. I feel that he did fail me because he didn't adequately defend me. I believe he could have talked with the witness. I believe that he should have called in these other witnesses that were never called in to testify. You had 9 people that were all there, that were all subpoenaed. The prosecutors never called them in, so nobody ever heard these people that signed these affidavits. If I'm telling you I've never shot a gun and they have this residue on the palm of my right hand but negative anywhere else, could you have gotten a gunshot residue analyst and look into the science of this here? Why accept the prosecutor's statement that this is true when I'm telling you I didn't shoot a gun? So there were things that I think that he could have poured energies into, whether they was dollars, resources, or just time, that were not done, that yielded to the guilty verdict that came out. I remember before jury trial started, I was in the county jail, and a lot of the seasoned people in the county jail that had been to prison before was encouraging me not to go to jury trial. They say, youngster, you don't want to go to jury trial. Nobody wins a jury trial. No black man wins a jury trial. If you go in there with a murder case, an attempted murder case, you will be found guilty. I'm like, so what do? You tell them that you want to sign for some time. I said, man, that's mean I'm admitting the guilt. If you go in a jury trial, they're going to give you a life sentence. When I think about my jury and the verdict of guilty, it's fair to say they felt me guilty because I was in court. It had nothing really to do with the amount of evidence or the lack of evidence, but the fact that I had an attorney and I was accused of murder and attempted murder. Police officers came in to testify. Forensic people came in to testify. They have no reason to lie, so we're going to go inside with the side of safety and say guilty. Because if you look at the evidence that was presented, there really wasn't enough evidence to truthfully say I was guilty. I wrote my first letter to Centurion, and I would get a letter back stating that due to the overwhelming responses of actual innocence, it takes a minimum of 10 years before we're able to fully accept somebody's case. And while that may sound harsh, when the system that you trusted just gave you 60 years, and you meet somebody in your same situation and someone writes you back from way in another state, that gives you hope.
So one of the circumstances in Richard Miles's case was that the shooting suspect was consistently described as being a very dark-complected African-American man. And during closing argument, the district attorney tried to undermine the difference in the coloring by telling the jury, well, Richard has been in jail for 17 months. He hasn't been exposed to sunlight, so of course his brownness would have faded and become lighter. That to me is what I call silly stupid. When you find yourself coming up with things like that, grasping for explanations that just are laughable, we need as attorneys to have a stop button to tell ourselves, wait, let's go forward and let's really find out what the truth is.
Attorney Wadley and the Innocence Project really did a great job with the exculpatory Brady violations. For 2.5 years, it was this further investigation.
I think by this time, Jim had shared with me the transcript and at least his write-up of the case. There are only 2 pieces of evidence that supported any kind of finding of guilt. One is the erroneous eyewitness identification, which is based on somebody running by you. And if you think about that for a second, when someone runs by you, all you see is their profile. And in 20 seconds, then how can that become the basis of such a firm, unequivocal identification? To me, that just seemed improbable. And the other was the gunshot residue. And one of the things about gunshot residue, it measures levels of antimony and barium. Well, those are the ingredients in matches. Richard was a smoker. He's lighting matches all day. It's ingredients associated with batteries and cars. Well, they'd been working on his friend's car all day. And there's transference from being in a squad car, where if somebody who's been before you had actually shot a gun, the residue is on their hands are behind their back, they lean up against the seat, they transfer gunshot residue onto that seat. So that anybody who comes after them, similarly handcuffs behind their back, their hands are rubbing up against the gunshot residue. The frailty of any conclusion that it was going to be gunshot residue really seemed very improbable.
Centurion hires a GSR test analyst, takes the evidence, and it comes out to be negative. The gunshot residue was not gunshot residue on my hands. They took that to SWIFT, Southwest Institute for Forensic Science, and actually talked to the young lady that testified. And she signed an affidavit in 2010 stating that given an opportunity, she would not testify in the same manner. Further investigation went towards Mr. Marcus Thurman, and he said, the day of the trial, I told the prosecutor that I could not identify Richard as being the shooter or identify the suspect. He had the man's picture in his pocket, and he took his picture out, and he said, this is Richard. He's going to be sitting next to the attorney. When you go in, all I'm going to do is ask you, do you see the person that did the shooting? Just point him out. Or literally, as Mr. Marcus said, point to the black man sitting next to the white attorney. So now you have the Brady violations, you have the gunshot residue test as false, the recantation of a testimony, and the fingerprints. It was fingerprints that was there at the scene of the crime. They were now tracked down to a gentleman that was incarcerated in the county jail, had a white Cadillac back in 1993. Same type of vehicle that the getaway car was.
The Richard Miles Act was designed to address the situation that occurred in Richard's case, and that is that the police department received information about his case before Richard was tried, but after he had been arrested and indicted. And that new information, which pointed to someone else being the shooter, was never turned over to the district attorney. So under the Richard Miles Act, when a district attorney is proceeding to trial, They have to get written statements and affirmations from the law enforcement agencies that are involved, certifying that all records in their files have been turned over to the district attorney's office, so that we'll never again have in a arrested person's file a memo that clearly identifies by name someone who is closer in description to the shooter, someone who is closer in background to someone who would be a murderer, be hidden because literally the memo was in the file. And Richard did 15 years because the memo was in the file. That is unconscionable.
The investigation of the actual person that was named in the police file. So the young lady calls in, she gives the name of her boyfriend and 2 other people that he was with. The Innocence Organization went up there to meet him. The gentleman is 6'2", 6'4", dark complected, basketball frame built, fit the description that all of the witnesses gave back then. Mr. McCluskey says when he talked to the guy, he states that, I remember that night. We were there. We left. And when we got to the house, we saw the shooting on the news. There was no news media coverage or anything like that. And so the gentleman basically put himself there. February of 2012, being packaged to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and they handed down a decision of actual innocence based upon prosecutorial misconduct, tainted identification, and faulty scientific evidence. Just because I went to prison, it didn't mean that sickness stopped or that death stopped. My grandmother passed while I was incarcerated. I didn't go to the funeral. My dad, being one of the most strongest individuals that I would say, he's this massive type of a guy, but my dad started battling with cancer. You know, I see him 2 hours once a month. And each time I see him, you can tell that he's getting smaller. And the day he passed, he was in the hospital. And I remember the story goes that Jim McCluskey, which is the head of Centurion, went to visit my dad and say, we've done it. And my mom tells me that after my dad heard that, that's when he closed his eyes and he passed away. And so it was as if the fight that my dad had to win was won and he could rest. And I walked out of prison 6 months after that. Match day to me is what this year is. So I did 15 years in prison and I've been out 15 years. And I remember when I first got out, people was like, man, how long did you do? I said, man, I've been gone 15 years. Man, that's a long time. I said, no, it's just a minute. Because I didn't have anything to weigh what was lost on. Now, 15 years I've been out, I have a nonprofit organization that staffs over 12 people, board member 15, and I've been married 11 years. I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old daughter, and I've accomplished this in 50. I have a house. And so when I look at what I have been blessed to accomplish in 15 years that I've been out, I now know what I lost in the 15 years from 19 to 34. And so you do have those what-if moments. What if I hadn't went to prison at 19? Where would I be now at 49?